Hello, everybody. You're watching. Well, nobody's watching yet, but I'm going to work, and then when I get done with the work that I have to do, I will read a chapter. Maybe I'll just do it when I want to take a break. And if anybody wants to hang out, it's easier for me to do that while I'm working and such. So that's what I'll do. I should probably move this to the other monitor so I can keep an eye on what's going on. I did read 2 chapters this morning. So I read them just as a recording. I figure, anything I do on a live stream, people see it when it's live. Then they might not want to watch it again when it comes out later. But so keep it mixing things up. Put some stuff out twice and some stuff out once. But it was some interesting chapters on architecture, shorter ones. So, yeah. So I think they are actually pretty fun chapters to read. I look forward to other people reading them and commenting them on such. Yes. That is hair that is purchased in anticipation of a future other thing. I didn't have a regular not bald person wig, although it actually looks terrible, but I figured maybe if I put some gel in it and stuff, I can make it look semi realistic. Also can. So I did I added some more of these. So I think I did that one. I did some more of these little explainer videos. David, I don't know if you got to see. So I used the VR, what do you call it? Notebook LLM makes nice little summary videos for you, but they look all fake, and obviously they are fake, so that's fine. But I wanted them to have a more personal touch, and I didn't want to be misrepresenting reality by creating something that was too deceptive, like people are making AI video where they can make anybody say anything. I didn't want to do that because it's not real, it's robots. So I made robo hosts.
So what if I told you that the invisible forces shaping what you want, who you admire, and even how you think are all part of an ancient religious system that's just hiding in plain sight? In this explainer, we're diving into a section from Michael Sartori's Tents Before Temples, a book that honestly decodes the hidden economics of our modern culture. And it argues that to really understand our world, we first have to understand our desires.
I mean, just think about it for a second. We scroll through feeds like they're sacred texts.
So there you go. The robo hosts. My wife hates it, but Yoav liked it, so. Because my other idea was if it writes a good summary, I could just have real people read it, But it's like there's usually like two voices, so it's like a back and forth. So that makes it tricky, you know? Mm. Hmm. But I just uploaded some more ones that I haven't seen yet. So I'm going to see what these look like.
You ever get that feeling that the world just doesn't quite make sense anymore? Like all the old rules are just gone? Well, today we're going to dive into a really cool framework from Michael Sartori's book, Tents Before Temples. It's basically a toolkit for trying to make sense of this kind of confusing cultural landscape we're all in. So the author kicks things off by framing our current moment as, well, a kind of wilderness. And it's a great metaphor, right? It's like all the familiar maps we used to use to get around have just disappeared. I don't know about you, but that feeling of being a little lost, a little disoriented, it definitely hits home for a lot of us. And this quote from C.R. Wiley just nails that feeling. It brings up this really wild idea. What if we didn't get lost? What if civilization just ended and the path itself disappeared from under our feet? So if the old landmarks are gone, I mean, where do you even start? All right, so the book offers up this core survival principle for this new wilderness, tents before temples. The idea is actually super simple, but it's also really profound. It's like, look, focus on what's immediate, what's practical, what you can move, the tent, before you even dream of building something permanent and massive like a temple. It's all about survival, about being adaptable first and foremost. So to help us actually navigate this wilderness, the book gives us this awesome toolkit. And the very first tool is something called Agents and Arenas. The idea here is to give us a way to kind of map the chaos by getting a handle on the basic structure of reality itself. Pretty big stuff. And believe it or not, it all kicks off with this classic philosophical question. But listen, this is way more than just a fun little brain teaser. It's actually the key that unlocks two fundamental symbolic categories that, honestly, shape our entire world. So here's the breakdown. The chicken, that's the agent. It's the thing that moves, that acts, that creates. And the environment it creates, that's the arena. In this case, it's the egg, right? The egg contains, it protects, and it shapes whatever is inside. It's kind of like the actor and the stage. You've got the force of action, and then you've got the context that it all happens in. Now, this idea gets really powerful when you see how these arenas nest inside each other, just like those Russian dolls. Think about it. The chicken's nest is inside a coop. That coop is on a farm. That farm is in a community. See how that works? Each bigger arena sets the context and really the rules for all the smaller ones inside of it. Okay, so we've got a way to see the basic structure of things, right? We've got agents doing stuff inside of arenas. But a structure by itself is kind of static. It doesn't tell you why anything's happening. We need a direction. Where's all this action headed? And that, my friends, brings us to our second tool, telos. Telos. It's a Greek word, and it basically means the ultimate purpose or the final goal of something. Think of it like the bullseye on a target. That telos is what guides everything the agent does, and it's what gives shape and meaning to the arena it's building. It's the big why behind the whole operation. And to really see telos in action, the book gives us these two really powerful, contrasting visions. First up, we've got Ozymandias, the super powerful king whose giant monuments are now just shattered ruins in the desert. His telos? It was all about power, command, and just pure pride. And, well, we can see how that turned out. It was a purpose that led straight to ruin. Then you have this completely different picture. We've got the words inscribed on the Statue of Liberty. Here, the telos has nothing to do with making powerful people despair. It's all about welcoming the tired, the poor, the exiled. It's this vision of a mother of exiles who's offering protection and hope. A totally different aim. So you see, these two poems lay out two fundamentally different goals for a culture, right? One has a telos all about dominating power, totally focused on the self. The other has a telos of protective liberty, focused on caring for others. I mean, they're both using the same stuff, stone, metal, words, but the purpose, the telos that's shaping the whole thing, completely different. All right, so let's recap. We've got a structure, that's our agent and arena. We've got a direction, that's the telos. But what's the actual force that makes it all go? What's the energy in the system? Well, that's where our third and final tool comes into play, spirit. Now, when the book talks about spirit, it's not talking about, ghosts or anything spooky. It's talking about the animating force. It actually pulls from the original Greek and Hebrew words pneuma and ruach, which literally just mean breath or wind. So think of it like that. It's the unseen energy that blows through a culture and gives it its unique character. And the funny thing is, we use this idea all the time and probably don't even realize it. We talk about school spirit, right? Or the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, even alcoholic spirits. Or we'll just say a place has a certain vibe. Every single one of those is describing a unique, animating force that's at work. Okay, time to put it all together. Let's see how these tools actually work in the real world. We're going to take this whole framework, agent and arena, telos and spirit, and apply it to one of the biggest, most complicated, and most fought over ideas out there, liberty. So the book makes this really interesting argument that there are two competing spirits of freedom. First, you've got this masculine agentic spirit called Liber. Think of this as the raw, unrestrained freedom to act, to just be an agent with no limits. But then you've got this feminine, arenic spirit called Libertas. And this is different. This is freedom within a protective arena, a safe place where you can actually flourish. Take the French Revolution, for instance. The author argues it was totally driven by that spirit of liberté. It was this do-what-you-want ideal of absolute freedom with no strings attached. And what happened? It eventually just spiraled into chaos because, well, it gave the most powerful people free rein to oppress the weak. But the American ideal, on the other hand, was aiming for something much closer to libertas. This kind of spirit is more like a protective mother hen gathering her brood. It's not about granting unlimited freedom to do whatever you want. Instead, it's about creating a safe arena, a structured society, where the vulnerable are protected so they can actually be free within those boundaries. And this biblical quote just captures the heart of libertas perfectly. It says, "Don't use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another." So you see, freedom here isn't a free-for-all for self-indulgence or grabbing power. Nope. It's a call to serve and protect each other. At the end of the day, it's the spirit behind the idea of liberty that decides whether you get chaos or a society that can actually flourish. So there you have it. We've gone all the way from feeling lost in this disorienting wilderness of meaning to having a really practical framework we can use to make sense of the cultural world around us. So here it is, your new cultural toolkit, all boiled down. From now on, when you look at any group or institution or social movement, you can ask these three simple questions. 1, what's the structure? Who are the agents and what are the arenas? 2, what's its telos? What's the ultimate goal here? And 3, what's the spirit? What's the energy, the animating force that's driving this whole thing? And this brings us to the final and maybe the most important point. The book doesn't just hand us these tools so we can look back and understand the past. No, it's meant to equip us to analyze what's happening right now. So it leaves us with this huge question to think about. Using this framework, what would you say is the ultimate aim, the telos, of the culture that we're all a part of today?
All right. Well, that's weird. I'm missing that. So So the thing I was trying to do, I just put the whole thing in there and it gave me this like summary video that it was okay, but it was weird because it just decided some like things were the most important things that were kind of random to me. It didn't really hit the whole framework that I was trying to go for. So then what I figured out is that if I just give it a few chapters that are on a more specific topic, it gives me something a lot better. So there's still a little bit weird stuff in there, how it's like, this is the first thing, and this is the key thing. And I'm like, well, I don't know if I would say that, but close enough. And most of the information was all there, because that was all taken from like the first 7 chapters of the book, essentially. And I took out a couple chapters that I didn't want, that are kind of shoved in there less purposefully. So that was pretty good. Worked pretty good. Luke, if you're watching, I'm streaming as often as I can stream, sort of. But probably going back to work tomorrow for reals. But I'm just going to be gone in the morning, and then I'll come back, and I'll probably will still be streaming more often. That's the goal. trying to get through reading all these chapters. I'm almost done. Actually, I only have like two more. And then I got to redo the wrestling one and the epilogue. And then I'll have a whole playlist. They're not releasing all at once. They're coming out like one a day. But by the time Christmas is here or New Year's or something, there will be a whole playlist of the entire audio book available. So that'll be fun. And I'm just doing work right now. That's why. So if anybody wants to come in and chat, that would be great. I'll put the link again. I'm assuming, just in case it's not there. I guess I could go on YouTube and pin it. Yeah. Here we go. And I have another video I can watch. So I need to watch these videos because I haven't seen them yet. So that's one of the reasons why I'm putting them up here. This is about the last 3 chapters of the book, so it should be pretty fun, I think.
You know that feeling when you're looking forward to something and the excitement building up is almost better than the event itself? Well, that exact idea is at the very heart of Michael Sartori's book, Tense Before Temples. We're going to dive into how a simple disagreement about a vacation.
So here's the thing. Everything is at the very heart. It's at the very heart. But this one actually is at the very heart, maybe, I would say.
You know that feeling when you're looking forward to something and the excitement building up is almost better than the event itself? Well, that exact idea is at the very heart of Michael Sartori's book, Tense Before Temples. We're going to dive into how a simple disagreement about a vacation led him to stumble upon a 3,000-year-old secret for living a way more joyful life. Man, this one sentence just nails a conflict so many of us have felt, right? For some people, a vacation is all about kicking back and relaxing. For others, it's gotta be a real adventure. And that simple difference is pretty much the spark that sets this whole incredible story in motion. So, you've got the author, Michael Sartori, and his wife, Mandy. And they are smack in the middle of this very debate. They had totally different ideas of what their precious time off should look like. And, as it turns out, it all went back to their childhoods. Yeah, their pasts really shaped how they saw things. For Mandy, vacations were these magical, happy times, just filled with fun. But for Michael, they were often super stressful, worrying about money, the car breaking down. So for him, a trip meant camping on the cheap because he had to. For her, it was all about making happy memories, no matter the cost. So, instead of letting this whole thing spiral into a big argument, which, let's be honest, is what most of us would do, he decides to treat it like a creative challenge. He's going to build a solution from the ground up that can somehow combine her need for comfort with his need for it to be affordable. And that solution was a yurt. Not just some pop-up tent, but this really cool, semi-permanent structure that could give them the best of both worlds. You get that rustic, outdoorsy vibe, but you don't have to give up all the comforts of home. It was the ultimate glamping experience, built from scratch. And get this, he built the whole thing almost entirely out of scraps and some clever hacks. The walls, just leftover wood strips and cheap zip ties. That super complex hub at the top that holds everything together, he used a computer-guided router to get it perfect. The whole project was just a masterclass in being incredibly resourceful. So, we're not talking about some flimsy, cramped tent here. The final result was this custom-designed, 10-foot-wide living space. It had a queen-sized air mattress, a custom-built headboard, and even designated spots for their clothes. It was the real deal. So, they take it to Acadia National Park, and the trip was a huge success. The yurt held up, well, mostly. On the last night, this massive rainstorm hits, and a little flaw in the roof meant his side of the bed got totally drenched. But his wife's side? Bone dry. So, mission accomplished, right? But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. The real discovery wasn't about building a better tent. It was about everything that happened in the months leading up to the trip. The project accidentally uncovered this profound truth about where joy actually comes from. It hit him. The vacation was so much better because of all the hard work he'd poured into it. All those months designing, fixing problems, and actually building the yurt. It created this incredible sense of anticipation. The journey to the vacation became just as important as the vacation itself. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? Every single late night he spent in his workshop wasn't a chore anymore. It was an investment in their future adventure together. The project gave his everyday life this powerful sense of purpose. The book uses this perfect analogy, celebrating Christmas. The real magic isn't just ripping open presents on Christmas morning. It's in all the weeks of planning, the decorating, the cooking, the secrets. All of that work, all of that anticipation is what makes the final day so joyful. So this personal lightbulb moment leads him to a much bigger question. What if this whole idea of joyful anticipation isn't just some modern life hack? What if it's an echo of something ancient, something people have been doing together for thousands of years? And that's the bridge. That's how we connect this homemade yurt project all the way back to the ancient Jewish festival of Sukkot, which is also called the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Booths. So, for anyone who doesn't know, Sukkot is this 7-day harvest festival. People build and actually live in these temporary little shelters called a sukkah. They do it to celebrate the harvest, remember their ancestors' journey, and it's this amazing time of joy, rest, and hospitality. Now, a really great way to get a handle on Sukkot is to compare it to Passover, which most of us have probably heard of. See, Passover looks back. It's all about remembering the escape from slavery. But Sukkot looks forward. It's a feast of anticipation for the harvest, for the future, and it was always meant to be radically inclusive. Okay, 70. What in the world does this number have to do with an ancient festival? Well, it turns out that during the week of Sukkot, a total of 70 bulls were offered. Now, this wasn't just some random number. In ancient tradition, 70 was the number that represented all the nations of the world. So this wasn't a party for just one group of people. It was a symbolic invitation for the entire world to come and celebrate. And that spirit of radical, open-armed welcome, it pops up again in a huge way in the New Testament. In the Gospel of John, it says that on the very last, most important day of this festival, Jesus stands up and shouts out this open invitation, basically presenting himself as the fulfillment of everything Sukkot was pointing towards. All right, let's just pause for a second. We've gone from a modern camping trip all the way to a 3,000-year-old festival. But what does that actually mean for us, right here, right now? What's the practical takeaway? The book boils it all down to this incredible philosophy for life that it calls putting tents before temples. It's all about choosing to prioritize these temporary, joyful, hands-on experiences as a way to build a life that's more resilient and way more meaningful. So what does that actually look like in real life? Well, it can be as simple as taking a trip into nature once a year, or using our weekends not just to buy stuff, but to create stuff, preserve food from a garden, build some gear, learn a new skill. When you do that, the whole year becomes this time of anticipation, which actually helps reduce anxiety and teaches us that we can thrive with less. And this whole approach taps into this really deep idea called the already and the not yet. The thinking is by building our own little temporary shelters, and that could be a yurt or a garden or even just a shared meal with friends, we get to experience a little taste of a better future right now, even while we're still waiting for that future to fully arrive. We're kind of practicing for the world we all hope for. And that's really the heart of it all, isn't it? This isn't about survival skills for some disaster down the road. It's about building skills for a better life today. By embracing these temporary, handmade, shared experiences, we don't just learn how to get by. We learn how to truly, deeply thrive.
Wow, that was the best one. So I fully endorse that little summary video. The robots did a great job. Now I just have to put their little robot host bodies in there. Maybe I should have them like dressed in camping gear or something. I don't know. Well, I've got enough work done so that if my boss looks at things, it looks like I've got work done. So I will read a little bit and take a break from doing that. Unless if anybody wants to jump on, please feel free to jump on. That would be great. But I'm gonna share the screen here. And these, okay, now I got to move the StreamYard browser. So these chapters are, I think, a little bit more theological, a little bit more exploring the Bible parts of this thing. So, and I remember, but there's also weird stuff in there because the weird stuff makes it fun. So I will read this and then see what else people are chatting about. Chapter 40, Seeds and Mountains, Architecture, Part 6, Landscape Architecture. The building is so central to our concept of architecture that we tend to overlook the role of intentional design in crafting the landscape. Eden was a garden planted by God, with certain trees at the center, suggesting a place of significance that even the least aesthetically inclined can understand. By nature of that distinction, we know that other trees were used to shape the boundaries of the garden. We do not know its shape. I like to imagine that perhaps it was shaped like the central image of the Mandelbrot set, a strangely anthropomorphic fractal. Regardless, there was something that made Eden a garden, that distinguished it from single fruit-bearing trees, too small, a wild grove, too chaotic, or an orchard, too ordered. Gardening is a part of architecture, or perhaps we should say that architecture is a part of gardening. The first great building project of the Bible was not a building, but a boat. Certainly, this was a marvel of engineering and architecture, as is the reproduction in Kentucky, which holds the record for the largest timber frame structure in the world. Noah's Ark was the symbol of a seed, and everything it contained within it was the seed of the new creation. Noah's first act of founding civilization was to become a man of the soil and plant a vineyard. To a man who witnessed the destruction of the entire world, the process of rebuilding began with planting of seeds. His dwelling was a tent, a home that could be moved to any place where it could be used most effectively, but the vineyard was designed to be permanent. The statement that Noah began to be a man of the soil in Genesis 9:20 indicates something about his past. Since he had the skill to build the ark, perhaps he was an architect. His former life may have been an urban city dweller or even a city planner. Regardless, he recognized that the first step of cultivating a new creation was to plant seeds in a particular pattern to produce a particular result. After accomplishing his first task, Noah reveals the telos of this new creation in his next step, the entry into the bridal tent. Footnote. In reference to the tent in Genesis 9:21, this is from Michael Heiser, there's actually a textual issue here. In Hebrew, what gets translated his tent here is oholo. It should be translated her tent because we have the noun he with a suffix, third feminine singular suffix, which is the h, oholo. This is a third feminine singular suffix on the noun. It should be translated her text. The Masoretes actually suggest a correction here. A third masculine singular suffix would be the letter wa instead of the letter he that actually is here in the text. So that's where scholars will come across this and say, the Masoretes thought it should be his tent. So that's what we're going to translate it, even though in the text it's really her tent. I'm suggesting that we should just stick with the text as we have it written here. Ham finds them in her tent. From a transcript of Michael Heiser's Naked Bible Podcast, episode 159. End footnote. Recapitulating the events of Adam in the garden and the creation of Eve, this story maps onto the entire trajectory of the Bible. Everything is done in preparation of the wedding feast. The feast is a celebration of the perfection of the key and lock union of husband and wife. As Christopher Alexander stated, every design problem begins with an effort to achieve fitness between two entities, the form in question and its context. As it pertains to buildings, they are married to the land in which they occupy. Adam is landscape formed from the earth. Eve is a temple built up from the stuff of the earth, extracted and rearranged. When we seek to build, we have two ways to achieve this fittedness. The first is to design our buildings to fit within the landscape. The second is to shape the land in preparation for the desired structure. The harmony of the fitness between building and landscape is especially clear in the design of castles. A child's drawing of a square house with a triangle roof looks fine on the flat green line at the bottom of the paper, but a castle drawn this way is missing something. Castles are placed in areas of defense, on the top of a hill, mountain, or island. The design is fit to the best features available within the given landscape. These immovable features dictate the shape and size of the castles, fueling the diversity of their designs. The unchangeable aspects of the landscape fueled the creativity of the architects and engineers, resulting in a great diversity of designs. In addition to selecting the most advantageous position, earthworks and moats are means of further shaping the landscape to enhance the castle's design. Movers of mountains. With great power through the use of many hands and tools, or the creation of new technologies, the landscape of the earth has been radically reshaped to reflect the designs of powerful men, from entrepreneurs to emperors. America is no exception, containing both the leveled peaks of the Appalachian Mountains, hollowed out to feed the engines of industry, and the immortal visages of our greatest presidents on Mount Rushmore. It was in the sight of another such man-made mountain that Jesus declared, "If you say to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' it will happen." Matthew 21:21. This mountain was Herodium, one of many vanity projects completed by Herod the Great. Several years before the birth of Jesus, the genocidal king commemorated his victory against a band of rival Jews by building a mountain resort. It was a hill raised to a greater height by the hand of man and rounded off in the shape of a breast. At intervals, it has round towers, and it has a steep ascent formed of 200 steps of hewn stone. Within it are costly royal apartments made for security and for ornaments at the same time. At the base of the hill, there are pleasure grounds built in such a way as to be worth seeing, among other things because of the way in which water, which is lacking in that place, is brought in from a distance and at great expense. The surrounding plain was built up as a city second to none, with the hill serving as an acropolis for the other dwellings. From Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, 14, chapter 13.9. The now ruined site is yet another example of the attempt to marry heavens and earth from the human side of the equation. It is referred to as Jabal el-Furadis in Arabic, the mountain of the little paradise, a hedonistic vision of the Garden of Eden. Herod was called great because of the many construction projects he completed during his reign, building mountain fortresses, coastal cities and harbors, and his greatest achievement, the expansion and renovation of the temple in Jerusalem. It was not in admiration of Herod that Jesus spoke of moving mountains, but in mockery. The Herod who moved the mountain was also paranoid and insecure, a shadow of the Pharaoh of Exodus, who ordered the death of all the boys born in Bethlehem when he heard that a king had been born. He had several of his own children executed after banishing his first wife and child to marry a Jewish princess. Herod was an outsider, an Idumean, the Greek name for the inhabitants of Edom, the nation of Esau, who sold his birthright for a bowl of soup. At the height of Jewish power, the Hasmonean dynasty enfolded the Idumeans into their micro-empire. Forcibly converted to Judaism, the Idumeans found themselves being viewed as second-class citizens, along with the Samaritans and Hellenic Jews. Herod led the revolt against the Hasmoneans, who by this point were not independent rulers, but vassals of the Roman Empire. Rome had no problem with a non-Judean king ruling the Holy Land, and Herod was more than happy to ingratiate himself with the emperor, crafting his great structures in the imperial style and naming the city of Caesarea after Augustus Caesar. Yet he also tried to ingratiate himself with the Jews by marrying multiple daughters of the Hasmonean dynasty and rebuilding the capital city of Jerusalem and the Jewish temple. In a way, Herod was like the anti-Moses. If Moses had rejected his Jewish heritage and tried to become the ruler of Egypt instead, but had to constantly reinforce a fragile ego by building great monuments and punishing his foes. Herod was able to move mountains by speaking to them, but only indirectly. He told his slaves and contractors to move a mountain, dismantling one small hill to combine it with its neighbor. His violent reputation kept his servants motivated by fear of punishment. He was the rebel leader who came to power by undermining the established hierarchy through violence. At the same time, this move taught Herod to distrust everyone who called him Lord and Master. He was beholden to his underlings and fearful of them, even having his own children executed when he worried about them seizing power. Thus, for every temple and harbor he built for the populace, he built a fortress to protect himself from the same people. Everything Herod built was built through fear. In contrast, Jesus relies on a different mechanism to move the mountains. For truly, I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Matthew 17:20. This verse has mystified people for millennia. Many seek to turn it into a sort of new age trick about manifestation, harnessing the power of positive thinking, or an attempt to rid oneself of all doubt, becoming fanatically obsessed with believing things without a scrap of evidence. But I don't think Jesus was talking about faith as mental power. He wasn't encouraging us to attempt telekinesis, and he certainly wasn't telling us to behave like Herod. What was this verse about? Jesus was a builder, a tecton, and the son of a tecton during the time of his incarnation. But in eternity, he is the architecton, the master builder, who lays the foundations of the earth. This is the metaphor used to name the tectonic plates, whose movements create the mountains and valleys. As the Logos spoke the world into existence, he directed the movements of its foundations, causing mountains to rise and fall out of the sea. But here, Jesus is speaking from his incarnate nature, man to man. He is the second Adam, and he has picked up the role and responsibility abandoned by the first. Jesus is teaching his disciples the architecture of the garden. Let's see what comments are in here. Israel will be 77 years, 7 months, and 7 days old in the last day of the Feast of the Dedication. Well, that's a interesting fact. Is it by the months of the Jewish calendar? I'm assuming probably. But cool. Mm-hmm. All right. Keep going. Fig trees and mustard seeds. What preceded Jesus' statement of moving mountains was an interesting circumstance. In the morning, as he was returning to the city, he became hungry, and seeing a fig tree by the wayside, he went to it and found nothing on it but only leaves. And he said to it, "May no fruit ever come from you again." And the fig tree withered at once. When the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, "How did the fig tree wither at once?" And Jesus answered them, "Truly, I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' it will happen." Matthew 21:18-21. Jesus experienced one of the most immediate human needs, hunger. He came across the same kind of tree Adam and Eve found in the garden, the fig tree. They had ignored its fruit, but used its leaves to make aprons. Trees are trained to produce according to the gardener's direction. What is pruned grows back stronger. This tree must have been a descendant of that first fig tree, because it had been trained to only produce leaves. "For I was hungry, and you gave me no food." Under the tutelage of its first gardener, the tree came to believe its telos was to make leaves, and it did so gladly. "I was naked, and you clothed me." But the better gardener knew that a fig tree's glory is in its fruit. Footnote. There's a whole other layer of symbolism about the fruit of fig trees. They are technically inverted flowers, and their pollination requires a wasp to enter into the flower and die. Well, we'll explore that another time. End footnote. When it is no longer capable of doing so, he removes it. Like the world before the flood, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, or the sin of the Amorites, its fruitless pursuit was complete. A tree that will produce no fruit is already dead. "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." To see it withered is to see it as it truly is. But the death of a tree is an occasion for only momentary sadness. They are the hardiest symbols of resurrection in all of creation. When one departs, another takes its place. Though pruning is necessary, pruning alone does not produce a garden. It requires planting seeds. And here we confront the difficult question of faith and its role in the construction of great works. The faith to move a mountain is like a grain of mustard seed, a seed which Jesus talked about with great admiration. The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. Matthew 13:31-32. What confuses us is the emphasis on the small size of the mustard seed. For we consider that someone with faith like a mustard seed must be a spiritual dwarf compared to someone with faith like an avocado pit. But this is completely backwards. It's not the size of the faith, it's the type of faith. Trees and plants are the silent observers of the events in the world. Their adaptive changes reflect a varied response to achieving their goals, but the telos of a tree remains the same, to bear seeds. The Norway maple is an invasive tree. It developed an ingenious strategy of dropping seeds with dive-bombing helicopter wings. The wind carries these seeds far beyond the already impressive height and width of the mature tree, and the little seedlings sprout up like weeds. There was one right in front of my Nana's house growing up. My siblings and I would drop the seedlings from the front porch to watch them spin. Other plants developed little Velcro stickers that cling to the fur of passing animals. This strategy is quite effective, though they have not yet discovered how upset dog owners are with their design. But the first method was the seed-bearing fruit. Humans and animals would eat the fruit and carry the seeds elsewhere, either discarded with the remains or in the creature's waste. For the survival of the latter, many fruit seeds have an enzyme coating that prevents them from germinating immediately. These plants obediently follow the original directive to be fruitful and multiply in all manner of ways. But one of the most common is to invest in their seeds. If you compare wild fruit to domestic varieties, gotta pause it.
Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we are diving deep into an idea from Michael Sartori's Tenets Before Temples that I think is absolutely fascinating. It's this question: what makes a story feel true? We're going to unpack the hidden logic that makes some stories, even the totally made-up ones, stick with us and feel so incredibly real.
You know, it really all starts with this one simple, powerful rule from an old Hollywood writer. Give the audience someone to root for. It's so simple, right? But it's everything. When we connect with a character, when we see ourselves in their struggles, suddenly the story just lights up. We're invested.
But just rooting for someone, that's only the first step. The real question, the one we're really going to wrestle with today, is what makes a story true? And I don't just mean factually accurate, I mean true in a much deeper sense, true to some kind of internal logic that makes it all click.
And that brings us to this idea of story logic. It's the concept that stories aren't just random events. No, they have their own kind of math, their own physics. There are rules that we somehow just get. It's why if you watch a tragedy but someone slaps a comedy label on it, your brain just goes, nope, that feels wrong. So picture it like this. Stories are like these massive natural systems. They flow like a river, right? And that river can branch off into different streams. Maybe one is a comedy, another's a tragedy, but they are all following this logical, almost inevitable course down to the same ocean.
Okay, so if stories have this built-in logic, then what's at the very center of it all? Let's talk about the soul of a story, that unchangeable part, its true essence.
And who better to help us out than Shakespeare? You know the famous line, Juliet gets it. The name of a thing doesn't change what that thing actually is. Sure, Romeo's last name is Montague, but that's just a label. It has nothing to do with who he really is, his soul.
This is just a perfect illustration of that. Look at Romeo and Juliet next to West Side Story. You can swap out the names. Montagues and Capulets become the Sharks and the Jets. You can change the setting from Verona to New York City. But the soul of the story, it's identical. Rival groups, star-crossed lovers, and that heart-wrenching tragic ending. That's why it works. It's a true adaptation.
Now, let's look at the opposite. Let's look at a false adaptation. If you check out these two passages from the Bible, they use weirdly similar language. An invitation, an offering of myrrh. The surface details look the same, but their souls, they couldn't be more different. One is about pure, devoted love. The other is about seduction and destruction. Using the same ingredients to tell a fundamentally opposite story, well, that's not an adaptation, that's a lie.
And that's really the crucial point here. A true adaptation keeps the soul intact. But the moment you change that core truth, that essence, you're not just retelling a story anymore, you're telling a lie.
Which brings us right to our next big idea, the magician's lie. Because it turns out, the most powerful and convincing stories we live inside are often just really, really good tricks designed to fool us. All right, think about any magic trick you've ever seen. They all have three parts. First, there's the pledge. The magician shows you something totally ordinary, like a coin. Second, the turn. He does something amazing with it, makes it vanish. And finally, the prestige. He brings it back and you're blown away. That structure is so important. So, why does that matter? Because the biggest, most powerful lies in our culture, they follow that exact same pattern. They take a simple, ordinary truth, the pledge, and then they twist it so completely that we start to question what's real. And that, right there, is enchantment. It's a spell that makes us blind to what's right in front of us.
The great C.S. Lewis was all over this. He pointed out how enchantment works by taking objective reality and shrinking it down to just our subjective feelings. You think you're having a deep conversation about a waterfall, but really, you're only talking about your feelings about the waterfall. The reality of the thing itself gets lost.
And here's the trap. This is how they get us. We are often born into the story, or we walk in halfway through, right in the middle of the turn. We never even saw the pledge, that ordinary, simple truth. So we just accept the illusion, the trick, as normal, as reality.
So the big question is, how do we break free? How do we wake up from these enchantments? Well, let's take a look at how we can start to see past the spell and find the real truth of things.
I want you to consider the beautiful Japanese art of kintsugi. This is where, when a piece of pottery breaks, they don't throw it away. They meticulously repair it with gold lacquer. And the cracks, they don't hide them, they highlight them. The history of the object, its brokenness, becomes the most beautiful part of its story.
Now, what's the difference between a real kintsugi bowl and some cheap, mass-produced imitation you might find? I mean, they might look similar, but one has a true story. It was actually shattered and it was lovingly restored. The other is just a fake. It's a lie. The difference isn't the appearance, it's the truth of its story.
This leads us to an incredible old Arthurian legend about Sir Gawain. To save King Arthur's life, Gawain has to answer a riddle. What do women most desire? And to get the answer, he has to promise to marry this hideous old woman, the Loathly Lady. He keeps his promise, they get married, and on their wedding night, she reveals she's actually under a curse. She can be beautiful, but not all the time, and she gives Gawain a choice. He can have her beautiful in public for everyone to see, but ugly when they're alone, or ugly in public and beautiful only for him. What a choice, right? What would you even do?
Gawain's answer is brilliant. He doesn't choose. Instead, he turns to her and says, "The choice is yours." He gives her the power, the sovereignty over her own self. And by honoring her true self, her real identity beneath the curse, he breaks the spell completely. She becomes beautiful both day and night. Seeing the truth restored her dignity.
And look, this isn't just some dusty old legend. This same dynamic, this breaking of spells through seeing the truth, it plays out in the real world in some pretty unbelievable ways. Let me show you a modern fairy tale. This is the story of Nick and Lex Rennick. They were both caught in a modern kind of spell, adopting identities that, while bringing them together, also led them down a path of serious harm. But then came the turn, a near-death experience that forced them to question the whole story they were living. And what followed was just a profound transformation. Lex detransitioned, her body healed in ways doctors couldn't explain, and their love was completely reborn. Out of this deeply broken past, they created a brand new, true story for themselves.
Their story, it just perfectly reflects this ancient, deep truth. That real beauty isn't about perfection or avoiding being broken. It's about redemption. It's about how even the most shattered stories, the most cursed situations, can be made beautiful in their time.
So we end right back where we started, but hopefully with a totally new way of seeing things. The world is constantly telling you stories. Stories about who you are, what you should want, what's real. The challenge for all of us then is to learn to look past the surface, to see beyond the spell, and to ask ourselves, which of these stories has a true soul, and which ones are just a beautiful lie?
Cool. All right. Yeah, you know what? It didn't. The last chapter is called the Eighth Day, so that's what that is. That one's on. So, but I guess maybe that didn't make it into the explainer as well. So maybe I should make it, and that chapter should get its own explainer video, or I'll mess around with it some more. I might also just cut some of these little things together to make like the best version of it, but we'll see. Once I finish recording all the chapters, then it's just beating the dead horse to get people to pay attention. This is what I learned is the secret. Okay. All right. These plants obediently follow the original directive to be fruitful and multiply in all manner of ways. But one of the most common is to invest in their seeds. If you compare wild fruit to domesticated varieties, one difference you will almost always find is that the size of the seeds is far greater. Where I live, there is a wild fruit tree that is quite plentiful called the Texas persimmon. It's loaded with small black fruits about the size of cherry tomatoes. They are sweet and tasty, with a caramel flavor similar to a date and a hint of a spicy sweet tobacco. But each berry is full of big seeds, with the fruit little more than a jammy coating around them. They grow like weeds as the drupes fall or are carried away by critters, because those big seeds are hardy enough to survive the dry climate. The size of a seed indicates its stored energy. The bigger the seed, the bigger the plant will grow before it requires nutrients from the environment. Perhaps it's the result of random variation or an imaginative telos on the parts of trees, but when humans select the fruit with smaller seeds to plant, they cultivate trust with the plants. The small seed that sprouts is not so afraid for the survival of its offspring. The sweeter fruit is selected, or the bigger fruit, and each generation planted in an environment of trust produces seeds that are in keeping with the telos of fruitful multiplication guided by the gardener. Footnote. As a side note, it's a very troublesome sign that we are producing so much seedless fruit. It's indicative of our society's turning towards destructive consumption. The seedless fruit will go extinct with the closure of the seedless fruit farm. End note. On the other hand, consider the largest seed in the world, the coco de mer. The seed is roughly 12 inches long and almost as wide, weighing an astonishing 40 pounds, and comes from a fruit nearly double the weight. The tree only grows on 2 islands in the Seychelles, and the leading hypothesis for its extraordinary size is that the resource-poor soil of the island makes producing any kind of seed a costly process. The trees grow more slowly than any other tree, and the fruit requires 8 to 10 years to mature before finally dropping, releasing the seed. The large seed doesn't fall far from the tree, meaning it lands in a relatively dark, densely packed jungle floor. But what it packs inside prepares it for the difficulty of survival. The seed cannot quickly rely on sunlight to grow, so it uses its stored energy to create a seed leaf that will travel underground up to 13 feet, perhaps sensing warmer soil that may indicate sunlight. This connection between the leaf and the seed allows it to continue drawing nutrients until its roots are well established. When it pops up through the surface, it quickly grows its singular leaf to a large size, maximizing its ability to gather energy from whatever sunlight is available. Whether it's symbolic genius or God's sense of humor, the other elements of the coco de mer are equally fascinating. The name means sea coconut because for as long as natives can remember, these enormous seeds have been washing up on the beaches of islands as far away as the Maldives, some 1,300 plus miles distant. For this reason, they were long known as Maldives coconut. The seeds only float after they have germinated and become hollow, so those who found them were unable to plant new trees. But they were fascinated by them as the seeds are, quote, oddly shaped, being the shape and size of a woman's disembodied buttocks on one side and a woman's belly and thighs on the other side. From Wikipedia. And they have been valued for their symbolic significance, trade value, and used for medicinal purposes. When the true location of their genesis was discovered by a Victorian general, Charles George Gordon, he was convinced that the Valley de Mai on the island of Praslin was the original Garden of Eden, as described in the Bible, and that the coco de mer was the forbidden fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. General Gordon wrote, Quote, externally, the coco de mer represents the belly and thighs, the true seat of carnal desires. End quote. It occurred to at least some of Gordon's readers that if coco de mer was really the forbidden fruit, Eve would have had a very hard time handing this gigantic fruit to Adam. But the significance of this nutrient-dense, seed-bearing seed, shaped like a feminine center of human reproduction, should not be overlooked. The Ark of Noah was a symbol of a seed, and a seed is like the ark. Just as the telos of the ark was to rebuild the world, starting with a garden, the telos of the seed is to grow into a tree. God instructed Noah to put into the ark everything that was needed to survive. The more you put in, the longer you can wait for the flood to recede or the rain to come. So when we think about the faith of a seed, it is the trust in its ability to sprout and survive. The coco de mer, despite its large size, is still a testament of faith. These trees, male and female, pour an enormous amount of time, energy, and resources into each seed, many of which end up drifting away on the tides, never to take root. The mustard seed is a sign of faith because it doesn't have anything else. Like the seeds scattered by the sower, it only can flourish if it falls on fertile ground. Matthew 13, 1-8. When Jesus tells us that if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you, what is he really saying? He is saying that whatever telos he has put inside of us, whether it is to build an ark, move a mountain, or any other task necessary to bring about the wedding feast of the Lamb, we must approach it with the trust of a mustard seed. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. John 21:18. Jesus speaks to Peter of the story of his life, and it is a journey of faith. Between going where he wanted and where he did not want to go, Jesus came to Peter and said, "Follow me." In his hour of shame, Peter tried to distance himself from his Lord, denying his closeness with the Master. But what he witnessed was Jesus demonstrating the lesson that Adam failed to learn. Unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. The faith of a mustard seed is not the elimination of fear, nor is it the blind erasure of any belief contrary to the goal. Peter knows he is going to be carried where he does not want to go, yet he exhibits the faith of the mustard seed, not in surrender to blind, pitiless fate, but by placing his trust in the hands of the great gardener. The seed foundation. Jesus told his disciples that the seed planted in the parable of the sower was the message about the kingdom. Matthew 13. And that the seed falling on good soil is an image of those who hear and understand it. The Apostle Paul articulates the message about the kingdom in the most succinct terms. Quote, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. 1 Corinthians 15, 3-4. This message is the seed that takes root in good soil. Everything that Jesus spoke was a metaphor about what the kingdom was like, but it was not until he became the kernel that falls to the ground and dies that people knew what the kingdom of God truly is. As Paul writes, if there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. 1 Corinthians 15, 13-14. This is not stated as hypothetical, but a proof. For by that time, many people had already experienced the life-changing power of the kingdom. The rest of what Paul did for the Corinthian church and the others were the actions of a gardener and a builder, actions to steer the growth of progress according to the telos of the seed. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. 1 Corinthians 3, 6 through 9. The gospel message produces a spiritual life within those who believe, but it is also meant to produce a visible change in the world we inhabit. The diversity and multiplicity of life has exploded over the centuries. As plants and animals adapt to ever-changing circumstances, they reveal new forms, unlocking new potential from the telos placed within them long ago. Hello, Jacob.
Hello, Mr. Man. How you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm taking a dog for his morning walk.
Nice. Weather's good?
Weather has been absolutely beautiful here in Los Angeles. Like for the past few days, I would say it's been like basically perfect weather.
Nice.
Yeah, thank God.
So what's up?
Not much. I saw you were on. You've been streaming. I wanted to thank you for all the streams. Haven't had a lot of chance to watch or stream myself lately. Been busy. I saw your baby briefly. Mazel tov.
Thank you. And Gabriel, and his wife their baby was born yesterday. So, yesterday?
Oh.
What's today? Wednesday? Monday? Monday.
Very nice. Very nice. I should text him Mazel tov as well. What's your son's name?
Benjamin.
Benjamin. Oh, my eldest nephew is named Benjamin. And did I tell you the story about how he was born?
I think so. Yeah, that it was like a surprise, like not a C-section, right? Is that right?
Yeah. So in order to do, there's a special ceremony for a firstborn child, that firstborn son, that you have to redeem him from a Kohen, and you can only do that if your firstborn child is a son who was not C-section. And so my sister tried very, very hard to not have a C-section. She was in labor for 3 days, and then they had to do an emergency crash C-section. And yeah, he was always going to be named Benjamin because his grandfather's name is Benjamin, and a lot of Sephardic families have this tradition of naming the firstborn son after the grandfather. And when my sister found out what Benjamin means, she was like, oh my God. It's like, yep, that's what it means.
Nice.
So hopefully all the pains have already passed with your son of affliction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, he's not a Ben Omi, so.
I am glad to hear this. I am glad to hear this.
Yeah.
How's your wife doing?
More chill. She's doing pretty good. I mean, the thing with her is always that as soon as she starts feeling good, she tries to do more than she should. So I need to try to force her to stay resting, even though she doesn't feel like she needs rest as much. But
well, there's actually like when women start going into labor, there's all these um, hormones that start, like kind of fight or flight hormones that make you excited and able and capable and stuff like that. And that's actually part of the reason for postpartum depression, because you're kind of on a sugar high while you're in labor.
Yeah. Well, and she did have it was a C-section, so she's got major recovery for that for a few more weeks still before everything is really healed up. So yeah, but it's going pretty good so far. So yeah.
And I'm assuming you didn't have too much trouble through the labor. It wasn't too painful for you.
Not for me, no. I mean, it wasn't really for her either. I think. I mean, she was on. Well, because our first one was an emergency C-section, so that was all sorts of trauma and stress. But then after that, they were all scheduled, and so it's much nicer because you just go to the hospital in the morning, and not too much later on, you have the baby, and then it's all. It all went according to plan, so that was good.
Yeah, my sister, because the first one was a C-section, was going to do a C-section for the second one. And she had scheduled it and everything. But he was born way too quickly, so they couldn't even do the C-section.
Yeah. Yeah, that wasn't going to happen for us. So, I mean, hey, I don't know. That's why it's like, I always get a little bit like, that's like one of those things that when you go down the like conspiracy rabbit trail of like, the hospitals and doctors push them like unnecessarily, and like yeah, that's probably true. They probably do push it more than they need to, but like basically every time my wife had 0% like dilation at all, so like her body was just not going. So and she had her water break the first time, so it wasn't going to come out that way though. Like the doors were shut. So it's good that there are things, because in previous centuries that's a death sentence. So so
the Hippocratic Oath originally, I mean, they don't say it now anymore, but included an oath not to do abortions or C-sections, because that was part of doing no harm. Because when you did a C-section, like that was a death sentence for the mother.
Yep.
Now doctors do harm all the time and they don't care.
Yeah. Well, but they try not to do harm to some mysterious ideological ego thing or something, whatever. Don't ever dispel someone's fantasy. That's the greatest harm.
Yeah, don't ever dispel someone's fantasies. That doesn't work very well when you're working in mental health.
Yeah.
Or at least people should realize that, but they don't.
Yep.
Sorry.
Well, I can't hear you now. Oh. Well, I suppose. Oh,
there you are.
Are you there?
Sorry about that. I am here now. My dog decided to pull on the leash that was in my hand, and my cell phone went flying.
Ah, yeah. That can happen.
Yeah. Lucky is 35 pounds now and still growing. And he's very, very excited about being a puppy.
Yep. Well,
It's amazing how quickly dogs mature. Like for a 4-month-old, he's running and jumping and all that stuff. And it's like, if he was a human baby, he wouldn't even be able to crawl yet.
well, humans are the most retarded in that way. That's our unique thing. I mean, compared to
Yeah.
all, pretty much all animals, I don't think there's. Yeah, but it's like, I mean, I also even looked at it. It's like, even with like apes and stuff, they're like, it's like a week where they kind of need like their mother to actively pay attention to them. But it's like even within a few days, they can cling to like the fur on their mother's chest or whatever. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we talk a lot about the mother-child dyad because, like, mentally, really, when it comes down to it, until at least age 3 or 4, a baby and the mother are not really separate psychological entities.
yeah,
And people find that disturbing or hard to believe, but it's really true.
yeah, yeah. It's like I don't even know if he really like knows what the difference is between like when I'm holding him or whatever. Yeah, but I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, he's pretty chill, and he doesn't mind me taking care of him so much. But yeah.
Well,
But he's
actually, I mean, the father, um, it's similar. So children imprint on the voices of both parents in the womb. That's why when they hear their mom or dad talking to them, it's so soothing.
yeah,
It's something they recognize.
yep.
Which
And
is like my number one argument against surrogacy. It's
Yeah.
like while I'm actually very pro IVF in general, surrogacy just seems like a bad idea to me.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's why what was my idea was that okay, because this is the thing that people will complain about, like what do I say? Like, so the kids or whatever that grow up and then they're like raised in this circumstance, and it's like, oh well, you can't complain because you wouldn't exist at all if it wasn't for your parents deciding to make these choices or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, that's kind of true, but well, that I mean that is true, but it's not a justification. So my idea is that if you want to have a child through those means, you should they should have like a like a opportunity, like maybe when they turn 18 or whatever, to take you for all you're worth and cut ties with you like legally, which I think would be a good incentive to make people really think twice about having a child as like an accessory or something, but also to consider how they would raise them. Um, I think that would be, maybe a good mechanism to promote good habits, I guess you could say.
Yeah, the thing is, it gets really complicated. Yeah, it gets really complicated with multiple parental units and kids, and it's just the whole situation. Like, the libertarian in me has a hard time being like, no, this is not something you should be allowed to do, because if people want to do it, I don't really see the obvious harm at the point where it, you totally have to. But yeah, it's a difficult situation.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't know. I guess that's one of the things I think, like, being just flat out opposed to all of the potential is bad, because, well, eventually I feel like if you have the people that have a belief about how things ought to be involved in the research, maybe we can get to the place where people figure out some of this other stuff. Especially for where it's like the circumstances where it's necessary.
Hi, Dad.
Hi. Like because of infertility issues or something, like not necessary, like for two men. Like,
right.
I mean, if two men want to if two men want to use a surrogate, they should just also have her, like, they should pay her way to live with them and raise the child as the child's mother. Like, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be part of your weird, whatever your relationship, but like, I mean, I don't know. It's like, people have nannies or something. It's like,
well, I think too few people recognize just, okay, there is a role that a mother plays in the relationship, in the parental role, that is different, and she is biologically equipped differently to play that role to the father. And we have this very silly idea, which I have to say, I blame your good friend Paul of Tarsus for, that men and women are interchangeable, and they're not.
Yeah, very, very clearly a misapplication of what he was saying.
I agree with you, and it's precisely what I say to people when they say there's no Jew or Gentile in Christ Jesus. My response is, well, he also says there's no male and female. And for the vast majority of people, they back down. Some people, well, I guess the vast majority of people I talk to about this stuff, they back down and they're like, yeah, he's not saying it's exactly the same, but when it comes to, I guess, the more liberal types, and frankly, I mean, Reform and Conservative Judaism do the same thing. Like, they want male and female to be interchangeable.
Yeah, I see. It's interesting. Like, I my thought in that was like, I don't. Well, I guess from a Christian perspective, like, I don't think I don't think if you have like a head pastor or something at a church and it's a woman, you're just, men aren't going to go to your church, or only weird men will. Like, So that's just like dumb that's a foolish thing. I mean, but then you get to another aspect of like women being able to serve in ministry. I don't think is necessarily such a big deal, because like I don't think that a pastor is the same as like a priest. Like, and this is being, Protestant or whatever, I guess you could say. Like, because I do think like in the priestly role, there is something very male about that, the symbolism of what he serves in relation to the temple and all that stuff. It's a male imagery of the office, but that's not, if you're just being somebody that teaches lessons and prays with people, women can do that stuff. But well, I gotta go step aside for a moment, but you can.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to say something. I just gotta go see what.
I actually should go too. We just arrived at the park, and there are human beings here. So,
okay. Well,
it's nice talking to you.
All right. See.
Bye, people.
Bye. I'm gonna just step outside for a moment. I apologize for not having anything happen for the past several minutes. Okay. The gospel message produces spiritual life within those who believe, but it is also meant to produce a visible change in the world we inhabit. The diversity and multiplicity of life has exploded over the centuries. As plants and animals adapt to ever-changing circumstances, they reveal new forms, unlocking new potential from the telos placed within them long ago. A garden is not an orchard, nor is it a grain field or a grove. It's a collection of diverse plants whose various environmental needs and temperaments are woven together by the masterful hand of a landscape architect. The vision of the New Jerusalem tree of life produces 12 kinds of fruit. It's an image of goodness, of the goodness of diversity within unity, a pattern replete throughout creation in Revelation 22:2. It's the marriage of the mountain and the city, the garden and the temple, the field and the building, as Paul writes. According to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled architecton, I laid a foundation, and someone else is building upon it. Let each one take care how he builds upon it, for no one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. 1 Corinthians 3:10-11. Christ is the seed foundation. He is stable and unmoving, yet he grows within us. For we know that if the tent that is our earthly home is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands. What kind of house is not made with hands? A tree, where the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. But there is a warning in this text as well. Paul is the one who planted the seed and laid the foundation. It took root in the good soil, but other things can take root in that soil as well. This is why the seed foundation of any culture is so vital. Not all seeds produce fruit. Not all fruit produces life. Some seeds produce plants with no variation, and then the same blight wipes them all out. The truth of the gospel is the seed that produces the most variation of any that is planted, and it produces good, seed-bearing fruit of many different kinds. Some of the seeds produced are like the wheat that just multiplies and multiplies in more good soil, like the evangelists and apostles. Others are like that mustard seed, who are carried where they do not want to go. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, as Tertullian said. The smaller the seed, the greater the faith. But it's not a blind faith. It's a faith born from experience and encounter. Peter had enough faith to follow, but he had many doubts. When he saw Jesus risen from the grave, his faith became like a mustard seed. We are not all given the same kind of encounter with Christ. Perhaps our faith is more like the Norway maple, the weed stickers, or an avocado pit. We can still contribute to the garden. Sometimes trees that don't produce many seeds can still have an impact. When a seed finds its way into the cleft of a rock, the rock will split in half. When enough seeds are planted, trees can move mountains. Get your gardening gloves on. To bring things back to the practical, we must ask how this metaphorical language of seeds and mountains helps us discover a path towards making the physical world we live in align with the telos God intended. It is clear that the kingdom of God is not a kingdom in the way that the United Kingdom is, in that there are no maps or borders. But the United Kingdom is also more than the islands on a map. When the people who support the crown are gone, the kingdom disappears. Yet, if we are to understand how it is like a mustard seed, which grows larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches, we need to keep planting real mustard seeds. Moving mountains by faith does not mean through power of belief. It's belief in a cause, a purpose, A telos pointed towards that which God calls good requires us to face problems that may seem insurmountable. We have moved mountains, carved mountains, hollowed them out, and rebuilt them. We've even built mountains out of the flatness of the plain. The ziggurats and pyramids around the world are evidence of our great abilities to do so. But those mountains were all about glorifying the human hands that built them, or the tyrant who commissioned them. The environmental movement would have us believe that humans have turned the globe into a wasteland. The reality shows quite the opposite. We have planted ourselves outside the gates of Eden and sent our outcasts into the wilderness. The greatest visions for the future are being cast by those who hate humanity. People like Yuval Noah Harari and Bill Gates have plans for shaping the future. Most of them involve rounding people up in pens to rot and letting the world go to seed. Jesus did not tell us how to shape the earth we inhabit, but history has proven that many of the greatest advancements in human flourishing, those that spread the means of encouraging life and liberty, have come through the actions of people whose purpose was shaped by the message of the gospel. It may take many steps to get there, but throwing mountains into the sea, bringing deserts back to life, and cultivating gardens out of barren plains could be answers to problems we now face: a meaning crisis, a marriage crisis, a purpose crisis. As Paul wrote, the message of the gospel was that Christ rose according to the scriptures. But there are many things in those same scriptures that are not happening yet. Some people believe there are many prophecies yet to be fulfilled. Others say they have already come to pass, and many more say these things are only symbols. But a symbol can only be understood in light of something real. If the vision of a kingdom is just symbolic, it doesn't really mean anything. The mustard seed and the mustard tree help us understand faith as a relationship of trust, the willingness to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of those who follow. Nebuchadnezzar's dream, revealed to the prophet Daniel, was a vision of empires that would rise and fall. But the final vision was that of a stone seed. A stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Daniel 2:34-35. The true mover of mountains planted a seed, an imperishable seed, as Peter wrote, "You have been born again, not of perishable seed, but of imperishable, through the living and abiding word of God. For all flesh is like grass, and all its glory like the flower of grass. The grass withers and the flower falls, but the word of the Lord remains forever. And this word is the good news that was preached to you." 1 Peter 1:23-25. The word is that which is produced by the spirit breath, moved through changing architecture of the mouth and lungs. The information is not physical, but it changes the physical world and affects the physical life of the hearer. It brings us into harmony with reality. It is a seed that takes root in the good soil, those who hear and understand it, and it produces fruit and more seed, which is visible in this world. Daniel minced no words in explaining the meaning of the king's dream. The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever, just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand. Daniel 2:44-45. Just as Babylon fell to Persia, and Persia to Greece, and Greece to Rome, the kingdom of God was planted during the time of the Caesars. In some ways, we are still living in the rubble of Rome. The remnants of former kingdoms are not yet chaff, but they are the bits of culture still being incorporated into the soil, being turned into good soil that will produce good fruit. Life in the mountain kingdom. Jacob, my Jewish friend, regularly tells me that he knows the Messiah has not come because the world is such a mess. He makes a good point. It's certainly true that the Messiah is not currently honored as the king of the earth by those who inhabit it. Yet we believe that one day the resurrected king will return to sit and reign among us from the mountains, the mountain that fills the earth. The vision given to the prophet Micah tells us what this mountain of God is supposed to look like. It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and it shall be lifted up above the hills, and people shall flow to it, and many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples, and shall decide disputes for strong nations far away. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift sword up against nation, neither shall they learn war any more, but they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of the hosts has spoken. Micah 4, 1-4. The Jews who believe the scripture see that it is their duty to bring this vision to fruition. They do so by keeping mitzvot, the commandments of scripture. Christians do not believe that we are justified by keeping mitzvot. The sacrifice of Christ has paid the price for our sins. But as we have been forgiven, we are now meant to produce fruit. If we want our Jewish neighbors to come to understand what Jesus has done, our actions should be propelling us towards the same vision. Many believe that this will not happen until Jesus sets foot on the Mount of Olives. Perhaps that is true in an ultimate sense, but that should not cause us to rest on our laurels. Mountains move slowly. Their progress over lifetimes is measured in inches. Seeds can also take a while to grow. If the solution to the mess of the world is the return of the good king, then our actions should be directed towards that end, even if the real completion is supernatural and spiritual. For people to understand and anticipate, the back half of the metaphor needs to be understood. In some mysterious way, every mustard seed, fig tree, grapevine, and even the kernel of wheat planted in the hope of that bright future finds its roots stretching down towards the good soil of Eden. 2 years ago, 3 now, I planted a fig tree in my own backyard. Most of the branches died in the first harsh winter, but what came back grew taller. It's grown over 6 feet in 2 years. It usually takes about 5 years to produce fruit. If it doesn't by that time, I could take the advice of the gardener from Jesus' parable. Sir, let it alone this year also, until I dig around it and put on manure. Then, if it should bear fruit next year, well and good. But if not, you can cut it down. Luke 13, 6-9. I will likely be in no rush to cut down a barren fig tree. It's a good reminder that the world is still fallen. But my goal is to create a space in my backyard where people can come and visit and get a little taste of what is to come, hopefully with fresh figs. There are some good soil folks who will never darken the doorway of a church. They need a different encounter to hear the truth of the word. That is reason enough to get your hands dirty and start planting some real physical seeds. Each one is an opportunity to put your trust in God. Ooh, need a water break. I think this is a really long chapter, but it's hard to tell because a lot of other stuff has been happening during this streaming time. And I should probably check and see. It's done with my work stuff. I didn't quite finish everything I need to do here. Um, If anybody wants to come in, feel free to come in. See who's watching. 5 people are watching. Mm-hmm. All right. I'll get back to reading. Feeling antsy about it. The resurrection is only the beginning. There is a cycle of feasts in the Jewish calendar, a rhythm of events that punctuate the year, tying the present to both past and future. The symbolism of these feasts connect food and drink to time and place, to relationships and duty. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. Ecclesiastes 3, 1-5. The seed foundation planted in the lives of those who believe grows into a tree that bears many fruits in many seasons. The resurrection is the kernel, but not the finality. It was sown in the season of escape, the Passover and the Exodus from Egypt. This was the time when many things must be left behind, like Noah filling the ark with seed and fodder, trusting that God would bring the lamb of sacrifice. Then came the flood, the crossing of the sea, the cross of Christ, and it was darkness, a total eclipse, the sign of Jonah casting judgment on fallen Nineveh. Then everything was formless and void, with the Spirit hovering above the face of the waters. There was no place for the dove to land. They were in a barren wasteland, tossed in a pit, walled in by stone, cold darkness, deep in the heart of the earth. Then the firstborn seed of a new creation emerged from the cracks in the earth's foundation, the budding sprout of a new tree of life. Suddenly the graveyard was transformed into a garden, and the dead man began to look different. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." John 20:15-17. What is the room that Jesus prepares in his Father's house? It is the huppah, the bridal chamber. Jesus' words to Mary are a reminder of the promise he made at the supper. What then is the season of his return? The Feast of Tabernacles. This was the feast of the harvest, the first fruit, the culmination of the seed planted. It was celebrated by constructing a sukkah, translated as tent, booth, or tabernacle. These were temporary structures made from tree branches and covered with palm leaves. Not unlike the huppah, and many weddings occurred on the days between the Sabbaths that open and close the celebration. Footnote: The Feast of Tabernacles is the subject of the final chapters in this book. End footnote. Jesus' resurrection has been long associated with the symbols of spring. This is not pagan synchrony, but the true fulfillment of what the pagans saw in nature and hoped was true. The first sprouts are a promise that the seed was not planted in vain. It's the first sign of future harvest. These signs then guide our steps. We are in a liminal space between two worlds, the already and the not yet. We are both the expectant brides of the one parable and the expectant servants of the next. Footnote. The parable of the 10 virgins is found in Matthew 25, 1 through 3, and the parable of the talents follows in verses 14 through 30. These two parables come right before the parable of the sheep and the goats, which has been a theme throughout this book. End footnote. Our trust is in our Master, but it is our responsibility to be found ready. As Solomon saw wisely that God had made everything beautiful in its time, he told us what to do. Quote, "There is nothing better than for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man." Ecclesiastes 3, 12 through 13. The next step is to do the work that's been set before us from the beginning. Quote, "Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you will find your welfare. For thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel. Do not let your prophets and your diviners who are among you deceive you, and do not listen to the dreams that they dream, for it is a lie that they are prophesying to you in my name. I did not send them, declares the Lord." Jeremiah 29, 5 through 9. These words were a challenge for the exiles in Babylon. The temptation to live in fear was strong. Their false prophets told them to run and hide, to worry about the times and the seasons, overpopulation and climate change, failing economies and civil unrest. The Hararis and Schwabs, the Faucis and Gates offered poison promises and life-ending paradise. They said, "Why would you want to bring a child into a world like this?" Some of us are in exile, others are living in the ruins of Rome. But those ruins are evidence of a mountain that's moving, a stone seed foundation that is filling up the earth. It's a messy process, with a lot of unknowns between the beginning and the end. The one key difference is for those who have heard the word and believed it, is that they have tasted the first fruits of the harvest to come. Oh, that was a long chapter. It seems that way anyway. If anyone's here, feel free to come in. The thing should be pinned, I think. I think it's there, right? No. Just post it again anyway. There's the link to hang out. I'm just finishing up work things. I guess I can see if there's any more of those videos. I can add them. I think there's a few more that I have not seen yet. Let's see. Texture. Well, let's try these. Some more videos to add while I finish things up. Mm-hmm. Maybe this. I'm doing real work stuff. That's why I'm just muttering to myself. Ah, here we go. Some of these things have loaded now. Let's see.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really provocative idea from Michael Sartori's book, Tents Before Temples. He basically argues that our whole idea of self has been completely rewritten in the last 80 years or so, and it all kicked off because of how we reacted to a single event in history. All right, so here's the game plan. We're going to follow the author's argument from the boomers' post-war moral code, track this huge cultural shift, and see how it all leads to the way we perform our identities online today. Let's jump in. So where does a story like this even begin? Well, the author says it all starts with the baby boomers, and with a moral code that he gives a very, very specific name to. He calls it boomerality, and the main idea is actually kind of simple. After World War II, our collective moral compass just got completely reset. Good basically became the polar opposite of anything and everything associated with Nazi Germany. And according to Sartori, this wasn't just about politics. This became the foundational ethic for an entire generation. But here's where it gets really interesting and a little controversial. Sartori calls it the reactionary error. He argues that in this massive rush to reject everything the Nazis stood for, we kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, virtues that people had valued for centuries, things like civic duty, patriotism, being frugal, they all of a sudden started to look suspicious, just because the enemy had also claimed to value them. So this reaction creates this brand new moral hierarchy. Right at the top, you've got equality and social justice. But this also created a new number one sin, judgment. The logic was, well, judging others is the first step on that dark path that leads to the Holocaust. So, judge not became effectively the first and most important commandment of boomerality. And the author points to a kind of surprising piece of evidence for this whole cultural mood, that Fleetwood Mac song, Don't Stop, which you might remember became a huge anthem in the Clinton years. I mean, think about the lyrics. Yesterday's gone, yesterday's gone. Sartori sees that as perfectly capturing the spirit of the time, this relentless push toward the future that meant you didn't really have to look too hard at the past. Okay, so how did this new moral code actually change people? Well, it kicked off a massive shift in how we see identity itself, a pivot from the person you were supposed to be in public to the person you felt you were deep down inside. The author says we moved from a culture of sincerity to a culture of authenticity. And you can think of it like this. In a sincerity culture, what really mattered was fulfilling your public role. You know, being a good worker, a good neighbor. The focus was on how you affected other people. But in an authenticity culture, that focus flips completely inward. The new goal is to express your unique inner self, no matter what your social role is meant to be. There's a quote in the book that just captures this flip perfectly. Back in the sincerity era, you had figures like JFK, who put on this public show of being the perfect family man, even while he was straying in private. The author argues that today's elites often do the exact opposite. They publicly cheer on breaking the rules while privately living pretty normal, conventional lives. This exact culture war played out on our TV screens for everyone to see. Sartori points to a classic show, All in the Family, as the perfect example. You've got Archie Bunker, who represents that old world of sincerity. Just do your job, be the man of the house, that's what matters. And he's in this constant battle with his son-in-law, Meathead, who is the voice of authenticity, always insisting on expressing his true feelings and beliefs, even if it blows up the whole family dinner. So then, this whole quest for authenticity gets passed down to millennials and Zoomers. But when you throw the internet and social media into the mix, the author argues it just morphed into something else entirely. And this brings us to the author's third stage, a word he made up, prophilicity. And this is a huge leap. The idea isn't to discover your authentic inner self anymore. No, instead, your identity is the performance. It's the collection of carefully curated profiles you build for Instagram, for LinkedIn, for whatever's next. In this world, you literally are what you post. You know, we used to make fun of this. Way back in 2007, Brad Paisley had that hit song about being so much cooler online. And the whole joke was about the difference between the online you and the real you. But Sartori's argument is that, well, the punchline has changed. For a lot of people, that gap doesn't exist anymore. The online persona has become the real self. The performance is now the identity. So how does this even work? The author says the key is something called second-order observation. It just means you start to build your identity by constantly imagining how this faceless online audience, this general peer, sees you. I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. Your sense of who you are is no longer being shaped by your family or your friends or your actual community, but by the imagined judgment of an anonymous crowd on the internet. So let's just lay it all out on a timeline. The author maps this generational shift like this. You start with the sincerity of the silent generation. That gives way to the boomer and Gen X obsession with authenticity. And that, finally, evolves into the prophilicity, that performed identity of millennials and Zoomers. Okay, so after this entire journey, from public roles to inner feelings to online profiles, the author gets to the big question. Is there even a real self left to find anymore? And his answer is yes, but he finds it in a place that might actually surprise you: theology. He says that the culture of authenticity was right about one thing. A true self does exist, but it was dead wrong about where to find it. It's not some pure, perfect, isolated core that you discover if you just meditate alone long enough. Instead, he claims our true self is fundamentally relational. It's built in the messy web of our relationships, our experiences, and yeah, even our biggest flaws. It just can't exist by itself in a vacuum. See, for Sartori, that judge not rule of boomerality created a massive problem. If you can never judge anything as being wrong, then you can never truly repent and change. So his solution is theological. He argues that the really authentic self isn't the empowered I got this self. It's the helpless self, the one that finally admits it doesn't have all the answers. In this view, you don't find your real identity by looking deeper inside, but by trusting an external, higher standard. It's a pretty radical call to go back to a kind of sincerity, a state of just absolute trust. And this really is the core of the author's whole critique. By making judgment the ultimate evil, he says boomerality didn't create a world of grace. It created a world of excuses. It just replaced genuine forgiveness with this system where we all just kind of let each other off the hook. And he concludes that this makes real reconciliation between generations and even inside ourselves pretty much impossible, because if there's no judgment, there's no real accountability. And so that's the journey Sartori takes us on, from the sincere public role to the authentic inner feeling, all the way to the curated online profile. And it leaves us with a pretty challenging question to chew on in our own lives. If our identity really is just a story, who or what is holding the pen?
That's a weird concluding thought. I don't know if that's what I meant. If that's, well, it's fine. It was pretty good. It does do pretty good with these smaller chunks, that's for sure. All right. The last chapter that I have to read, except for the ones that I have to reread because I read them in a silly voice. Okay. Chapter 41, Tree Houses. Architecture, Part 7, The Castle Within the Seed. There are many steps to be taken between the world we live in and the vision of the New Jerusalem. One more pattern from Alexander's plans can help us find a path, and one more imagination to foster wonder and excitement. There is a great divide between the urban and agrarian visions of the good life. The Bible gives us images of both, every man under his own fig tree and vine, and the streets paved with gold. The image of the new heavens and the new earth is the wedding of the two, the city of God descending as the bridal chamber for the King of the universe. Alexander identifies the problem and proposes a unique solution. This is from the pattern language, City and Country Fingers. The distribution of towns required to make a balanced region can be further helped by controlling the balance of urban land and open countryside within the towns and cities themselves. Continuous sprawling urbanization destroys life and makes cities unbearable, but the sheer size of cities is also valuable and potent. People feel comfortable when they have access to the countryside, experience of open fields and agriculture, access to wild plants and birds and animals. For this access, cities must have boundaries with the countryside near every point. At the same time, a city becomes good for life only when it contains a great density of interactions among people and work and different ways of life. For the sake of this interaction, the city must be continuous, not broken up. In this pattern, we shall try to bring these two facts to balance. Let us begin with the fact that people living in cities need contact with true rural land to maintain their roots with the land that supports them. A 1972 Gallup poll gives very strong evidence for this fact. The poll asked the question, if you could live anywhere, would you prefer a city, suburban area, small town, or farm? And received the following answers from 1,465 Americans. City, 13%, suburb, 13%, small town, 32%, farm, 23%. And this dissatisfaction with cities is getting worse. In 1966, 22% said they preferred the city. In 1972, only 6 years later, this figure dropped to 13%. It's easy to understand why city people long for contact with the countryside. Only 100 years ago, 85% of the Americans lived on rural land. Today, 70% live in cities. Apparently, we cannot live entirely within cities, at least the kind of cities we have built so far. Our need for contact with the countryside runs too deep. It is a biological necessity. Unique as we may think we are nevertheless as likely to be genetically programmed to a natural habitat of clean air and a varied green landscape as any other mammal. To be relaxed and feel healthy usually means simply allowing our bodies to react in the way for which 100 millions of years of evolution has equipped us. Physically and genetically, we appear best adapted to a tropical savanna, but as a cultural animal, we utilized learned adaptations to cities and towns. For thousands of years, we have tried in our houses to imitate not only the climate, but the setting of our evolutionary past. Warm, humid air, green plants, and even animal companions. Today, if we can afford it, we may even build a greenhouse or swimming pool next to our living room, buy a place in the country, or at least take our children vacationing on the seashore. The specific physiological reactions to natural beauty and diversity, to the shapes and colors of nature, especially to green, to the motions and sound of other animals, such as birds, we as yet do not comprehend. But it is evident that nature in our daily life should be thought of as a part of the biological need. It cannot be neglected in the discussions of resource policy for man. But it is becoming increasingly difficult for city dwellers to come into contact with rural life. In the San Francisco Bay region, 21 square miles of open space is lost each year. As cities get bigger, the rural land is farther and farther away. With the breakdown of contact between city dwellers and the countryside, the cities become prisons. farm vacations, a year on the farm for city children, and retirement to the country for old people are replaced by expensive resorts, summer camps, and retirement villages. And for most, the only contact remaining is the weekend exodus from the city, choking the highways and the few organized recreation centers. Many weekenders return to the city on Sunday night with their nerves more shattered than when they left. If we wish to reestablish and maintain the proper connection between city and country, and yet maintain the density of urban interactions, it will be necessary to stretch out the urbanized area into long, sinuous fingers which extend into the farmland, shown in the diagram below. I realized that was probably boring, but I had a work phone call, so I had to take care of that. All right. I can put up another video. Let's see what this one says.
All right, today we're jumping headfirst into the architectural vision from Michael Sartori's book, Tents Before Temples. And let me tell you, it's a pretty radical and thought-provoking look at what our buildings could be, and maybe what they really should be.
So right out of the gate, the book hits you with this whopper of a claim. It's designed to just stop you in your tracks, you know? Because for centuries, we've all thought of the cathedral as the absolute peak of architecture and spirituality. But Sartori says, hold on, maybe we've been looking at this all wrong.
So why the castle? Why put castles over cathedrals? Well, the argument is that the castle is a more complete picture of the cosmos. It's a true world in miniature.
Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting. Think about it. A cathedral draws this really sharp line. You've got the sacred world inside and the regular secular world outside. But a castle holds both. It has a chapel right there inside its walls, and that chapel makes the entire structure sacred. It kind of blurs that line completely. So you see, the castle is this amazing fractal of nested spaces. It's a place of work. You've got craftsmen and soldiers living right there together. It's a place of life, a place that welcomes strangers and protects the vulnerable.
And you know, when things get bad, those walls turn it into an ark of stone, literally protecting the seeds of the next generation. It's a whole world.
Okay, to really get where this vision is coming from, we have to dig into its roots, which are found in the work of the legendary architect Christopher Alexander and his idea of the timeless way of building. It's all about an architecture with a soul.
Alexander's big idea is something he called a pattern language. Think of it like a shared vocabulary, a toolkit of design solutions for problems we all face. It's not a book of rigid rules. No, it's a flexible language that empowers regular people, not just fancy architects, to actually shape their own world in a way that feels, well, alive.
And this just shows you the beautiful, fractal nature of his whole idea. It scales all the way from huge concepts like independent regions, we're talking entire self-governing cultures, down to something as simple as a 6-foot balcony. And why that? Because his insight was that a balcony less than 6 feet deep almost never gets used. It proves that even the smallest, most human-scale details are what make a space actually work.
And this right here, this is the heart of it all. For Alexander, real architecture isn't about some famous architect creating a monumental image or a calculated pose.
All right. I'm not going to play that whole 7-minute video just because. I'm going to go back to reading this now. Okay. If we wish to reestablish and maintain the proper connection between city and country, and yet maintain the density of urban interactions, it will be necessary to stretch out the urbanized area into long, sinuous fingers which extend into the farmland, shown in the diagram below. Not only will the city be in the form of narrow fingers, but so will the farmlands adjacent to it. The maximum width of the city fingers is determined by the maximum acceptable distance from the heart of the city to the countryside. We reckon that everyone should be within 10 minutes walk of the countryside. This would set a maximum width of 1 mile for the city fingers. The minimum for any farmland finger is determined by the minimum acceptable dimensions for typical working farms. Since 90% of all farms are still 50 acres or less, or 500 acres or less, and there is no respectable evidence that the giant farm is more efficient, see footnote, these fingers of farmland need to be no more than 1 mile wide. The implementation of this pattern requires new policies of 3 different kinds. With respect to the farmland, there must be policies encouraging the reconstruction of small farms, farms that fit the 1 mile bands of country land. Second, there must be policies which contain the city's tendency to scatter in every direction. Every city dweller would have access to the countryside. The open country would be a half-hour bicycle ride from downtown. Therefore, keep interlocking fingers of farmland and urban land, even at the center of the metropolis. The urban fingers should never be more than 1 mile wide, while the farmland fingers should never be less than 1 mile wide. Whenever land is hilly, keep the country fingers in the valleys and the city fingers on the upper slopes of the hillsides. Break the city fingers into hundreds of distinct self-governing subcultures and run the major roads and railways down the middle of these city fingers. Alexander and his colleagues have done the difficult work of integrating the needs of the human soul with the convenience of urban centers and the restful experience of agrarian life. The image of interlocking fingers reflects the more intimate joining of the hands of a husband and wife, a fractal image of their greater unity and celebration of distinction. The image above is one illustration, but the pattern could be implemented in many different ways. The variegated pattern of veins in a leaf, the swirling ridges of a fingerprint, or the undulating ripples of a beach at low tide. Or it could follow the roadways that have developed over thousands of years of civilization. We could imagine the pattern as it evolves in the future, the mosaic of subcultures living on the elevated ridges above the agricultural valleys, one on one side, a futuristic city of glass, bent in organic curves. On another side, a classical reproduction of Athens or Rome, with a Gothic skyline in the distance and a pagoda style behind it. One problem with designing at the scale imagined above is that it is costly and time-consuming to build so much infrastructure. But perhaps there are ways that just a few people could sketch out the undeveloped wilderness in a way to encourage future generations to follow patterns laid out ahead of time. While the possibility of biologically living domiciles is a complicated problem, there is another organic solution that may be more easily attained. Future forests. Consider again the sea coconut. Its massive seed contains the equivalent of a foreign invasion force, ready to deploy a fully functional tree, albeit a juvenile one, in a short amount of time. It can send its shoots long distances underground and put out a fully developed leaf as soon as it emerges in the sunlight. Another example is the kikayon plant God provided for Jonah. Jonah went out of the city and sat to the east of the city and made a booth, sukkah, for himself there. He sat under it in the shade till he should see what would become of the city. Now the Lord God appointed a plant and made it come up over Jonah, that it might be a shade over his head to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. Jonah 4:5-6. While Jonah waits for the destruction of his enemies in Nineveh, God provides a sign of affection for his prophet, much as the husband provides a wedding tent for his bride. The plant will be removed just as quickly as it sprung up to help Jonah realize that the Ninevites are also people worthy of compassion. But just as God sends a mundane means of destroying the plant in the form of a worm, the rapid growth is not a distinctly miraculous occurrence. Plants can grow surprisingly fast under the right circumstances. The idea of a shade-producing plant springing up overnight is not unheard of, but having a bit more shade doesn't exactly solve a civilizational crisis. With a bit more time, however, purposeful planting of certain trees could be a very useful aid in solving the problems that will continually arise in regard to shelter and housing. An interesting anecdote comes from Sweden. Sometime in the 1830s, the Swedish crown was searching for timber to build more ships and stumbled across some ideal specimens on the island of Visingsö. Seeing that the conditions were just right, they planted 300,000 oak trees in orderly rows, interspersed with fir trees and other species that would grow straight and more quickly. The oaks followed the ideal growth plan for this specifically engineered environment, which was to grow extremely tall and straight up towards the sun. By the time the slow-growing trees were ready to be harvested, they were no longer needed by the Navy or commercial shipbuilders, since they had all switched to steel hull designs. However, the unusually straight lumber is still highly sought after for many conventional uses, such as flooring, barrel making, and timber frame construction. A contrasting example is the well-known tale of Johnny Appleseed, who traveled all over the northeastern regions of the United States and Canada, planting apple seeds everywhere he went. While the real John Chapman was a bit more responsible in his arboriculture, planting fenced-in nurseries rather than random trees, his project was a mixed success. Apples do not grow true to seed. If you plant seeds from the most delicious apple, the tree that grows is likely to produce tiny, bitter crab apples. This wasn't always a complete failure. The primary use of apples in that day was to make cider. The quality of taste was not as important, so long as the juice could be fermented. The saplings are also useful as rootstock. Commercial nurseries graft a stem from a tree known to produce good fruit onto the base of a tree planted from seed. Each tree will then produce fruit identical to the grafted stem. This is how orchards produce consistent varieties. There may be better and worse Granny Smiths, but the trees all grow the same type. The contrast between these two examples shows the importance of both the agent and the arena. The telos of an acorn is true. It always produces an oak tree with strong wood. But without the framework of tall, straight trees, they tend to split and bend, reaching out in many directions. The apple, on the other hand, regardless of being planted in orderly rows and pruned to produce fruit, or sown wildly throughout nature, offers no promise of fruit worth eating. City seeds. Until recently, all we could control was the environment in which a tree was grown. Changes in the circumstance of a plant's life activate the environmental controls within its genes. They react with new growth to various stimuli. Fertilizers can produce general growth overall. Warmth and sunlight can extend growth periods or allow tropical plants to grow in colder environments when placed in a greenhouse. Even the act of pruning influences these environmental controls. The reaction to having limbs removed is the same, whether done by gardening shears, the wind, or the nibbling teeth of forest critters. The loss in one area promotes new growth, usually at the first healthy node below where the damage occurs. Humans have been manipulating these factors for millennia, whether to produce food or environmental barriers. Jonah's shade tree is one example. A far more interesting one is the use of willow coppices. These are fences grown by planting cut branches of willow in a regulated pattern. Like most trees, the cambium cells just beneath the bark are able to grow into any kind of tree cell the plant requires. When planted in a rich soil environment, they begin to sprout roots. The end exposed to sunlight will begin to sprout leaves and branches. When many of these thin branches are planted in a crisscross pattern, tied together at the intersections, the stems will merge together into one continuous organism. This produces a living fence that can last for centuries with proper maintenance. We have learned many skills to direct plants to grow according to the arenic forces we provide for them. We have learned to cultivate the agentic properties we desire through careful selection of seeds and cross-fertilization. But there have been limits to how much we can achieve through this result. This has led to an increase in the pursuit of genetic modification. Unfortunately, the ends being pursued are not good for our long-term future. Seedless fruit, trademark protected seeds, and monocultural farming are all practices that put short-term profits above long-term flourishing. These short-term conveniences, however unsustainable, do point to something important. The limitations on what a plant can do have not been fully explored. There are obvious lines of research to be pursued. Instead of maximizing caloric output, crops can be grown for greater nutrition or to combat a specific illness. These goals are well worth the effort of being pursued. However, another worthy line of experimentation is the architectural possibilities of genetically engineered plants, and specifically trees. Trees are living things with long lifespans. Most species can grow for centuries. Like the mustard tree, they happily host other forms of life. We use them for many purposes, as demonstrated in Shel Silverstein's well-loved children's book, The Giving Tree. However, our tree consumption usually follows the same course as the story, resulting in a melancholy man sitting on a melancholy stump. The trees don't seem to mind, though it makes Tolkien quite upset. But what has been done before is not a sufficient reason to stop us from attempting something new. Here, we can embrace Tolkien's vision far more thoroughly by building living tree houses. The common aesthetic interpretation of Tolkien's Lothlorien is a village of living dwellings grown from the trees of the enchanted forest. This same idea is present in many other places. Robert Jordan's Ogiers are tree singers whose songs can shape living trees into the forms of objects and dwellings. Even the Ewok village in The Return of the Jedi paints a picture of arboreal innocence, the fuzzy rascals living peacefully among the forest moon of Endor, high in the branches of trees suspiciously similar to the California redwoods. Making elaborate tree houses is a popular retreatist fantasy amongst those who can afford to do so. However, unlike Tolkien and Jordan's living homes, they suffer the same fate. Dead wood is nailed to living trees, slowly decaying as the host grows and swells, weakening parts that make up floors and walls and ceilings. The lifespan of a treehouse can be quite short without consistent maintenance. A house-like structure could be built in the method of the willow coppice, but the labor required is still quite great, and it would only be suitable for a temporary structure. My solution is to tinker with the internal architecture of the tree. As each living thing grows, it follows a pattern of development found within its DNA. Symmetrical limbs, right hands and left hands, bones, organs, and flesh. Dr. Michael Levin has been exploring the questions surrounding how the knowledge is possessed by these cells. The cells know when a task is finished. They know when to stop transforming into a liver and get started on the skin. The structure they can build are quite complex. As mentioned, the skeletal structure of a quadruped, its legs and torso, the covering of skin, are quite like a tent. Though we tend to look at the fractal shape of a branching tree as somewhat bland and repetitive, when those branches terminate, they produce organs of sexual reproduction every bit as sophisticated as those seen in the animal kingdom. They have photosensitive cells in their leaves and moisture-seeking cells in their roots. They have sophisticated circulatory systems and even the ability to communicate an exchange of sugars and moisture with fungal bodies that live in the soil. All of this complexity is then copied and recorded in each cell as genetic information, eventually placed into a seed, which can lay dormant for thousands of years and be reactivated under the right conditions. If a tree can produce such incredible sophistication without the interference of environmental factors, perhaps the instructions could be modified to create another simple shape, like that of a house. It is quite possible to plant 4 trees and guide their growth into the shape of a dwelling place. But what if a house could emerge from a single seed? If they were as big as the seed of the Coco de Mer, they could get quite a bit of work done in short order. Ambitious Johnny Appleseeds could do their city planning in just a few afternoons, planting seeds of future houses, each with its own fig tree and grapevine. There are certainly limitations on just how quickly a tree house can be grown from a seed, and such structures may never be suitable for more than a fun camping trip. But it would provide the opportunity for one generation to lay out a plan for those to come. Like the lattice that allows a grapevine to climb towards the sun, tiny villages could trace out the diagram of a city as an invitation for their children and grandchildren to find their place within a larger vision of the future. And that was the end of the chapter. So everything is now recorded now, except for the wrestling one. And this stream's going on 3 hours, so it's probably good to take a break. So I'll stick around for a little bit, see if anybody wants to hang out. I'll play another one of these videos. I don't think I've watched this one yet.
Have you ever stopped and wondered why some cultures, like the ancient Egyptians, are basically just history now, while others seem to last forever? We're going to dive into a really fascinating theory from Michael Sartori that kind of cracks the code on cultural survival and what happens when a culture breaks those rules. I mean, we see it all through history, right? Huge, powerful empires just crumble. Whole civilizations end up as just a paragraph in a textbook. But then you have others that, against all the odds, just keep on going. So what's the secret sauce? What's that magic ingredient that makes a culture last? Well, Sartori argues the answer is in this powerful metaphor. A culture has to have a gate. Sometimes that gate needs to be closed to protect its core identity, to know who it is. But, and this is the crucial part, that gate also has to open. It has to let in new information, new ideas, even correction. It's a balancing act. Because if the gate's always open, you just dissolve into everything else. But if it's always shut, you turn into a prison and stagnate. So what happens when that gate just stays locked shut? Let's actually explore that idea by looking at two incredible cultures that are, for very different reasons, basically frozen in time. And this is where it gets really interesting, because these two show completely opposite ways a culture can get stuck. On one hand, you've got the Samaritans, who survived by building a fortress around a very lean, ancient tradition. And on the other, you have the Piraha, who are so radically locked into the present moment that outside ideas literally can't find a way in. The Samaritans are amazing. They're like a living time capsule. They've held on for thousands of years, not by adapting and changing, but by keeping an incredibly simple and defensible core. Their scripture is just the first 5 books of the Bible. That's it. That makes their beliefs super easy to pass down, and all the constant debate with their neighbors actually kept them sharp. It forced them to know exactly who they were. Okay, now for the other extreme. Let's talk about the Piraha people down in the Amazon. These guys are, wow, they are fascinating because their entire way of life just turns our assumptions about language, thought, and reality completely upside down. They are a culture sealed off from the world, not by walls, but by the very structure of their minds. It all boils down to this one simple but totally radical rule. If you didn't see it with your own 2 eyes, it is not real, period. There's this famous story of a missionary trying to tell them about Jesus, and they asked him, "Did you see this man?" When he said no, they just completely lost interest. To them, it was just irrelevant information from a crooked head, which is their term for any non-para. And this is where it gets mind-bending, because their language is the very thing that builds the walls of their cultural prison. Their language has no concepts for numbers or colors and no real way to talk about the past. And this isn't just a vocabulary gap, it fundamentally shapes their reality. It makes it nearly impossible to absorb any outside ideas that rely on abstract thought. So both the Samaritans and the Piraha are static because they're missing that open gate. But what exactly is supposed to come through that gate? What is that vital ingredient that healthy cultures actually need? This is what Sartori calls the prophetic voice. It's a message that comes from outside the established system, from the wilderness, that chaotic, unknown place. It's the disruptive, sometimes uncomfortable truth that a culture has to hear to avoid becoming a rigid, self-referential prison. And to really get why this outside voice is so critical, Sartori uses this fantastic analogy based on the work of neuroscientist Ian McGilchrist. It reveals a kind of civil war that can happen inside our own heads and also within our cultures. So think of your brain as having 2 modes. McGilchrist calls the right hemisphere the master. It's intuitive, it sees the big picture, the whole forest. The left hemisphere is the emissary. It's analytical, detail-oriented, and breaks things down into manageable parts. It only sees the individual trees. Now, both are absolutely vital, but they're supposed to work together with the master in charge. The danger comes when the emissary, that detail-oriented left brain, stages a coup and forgets it works for the master. When a culture gets dominated by this reductionist, analytical thinking, it gets trapped. It dismisses anything it can't immediately categorize or measure, and it loses the big picture entirely. Anything new, anything from the wilderness, is suddenly seen as a threat to its fragile, hyper-organized system. And these cultural shifts, these takeovers by one way of thinking, they aren't always gradual. They can be triggered by what Sartori calls psychotechnologies. These are powerful mental tools like, say, the invention of the alphabet or a brand new core belief about reality that don't just add new information, but they fundamentally rewire how an entire civilization thinks. Okay, so this brings us right to the present day. Sartori argues that we are living through the rise of a new global psychotechnology, creating what he calls the emissary's empire. He calls it the urban monoculture. What is that? It's a single, dominant, globalized worldview that is becoming increasingly intolerant of any competing ideas. It's the cultural equivalent of the emissary brain seizing total control, trying to create one unified, predictable, and centrally managed system. But here's the twist. Old authoritarian systems, they created martyrs. When you executed a prophet, you often just amplified their message. This new system is smarter. It doesn't make you a martyr. It makes you irrelevant. It silences dissent through mockery, cancellation, and digital exile. The message isn't amplified, it's simply erased from the conversation. So if this urban monoculture is so effective at silencing that prophetic voice from the wilderness, is there any hope? Where can we even look for that vital correction our culture needs to avoid becoming a prison? Well, Sartori argues that trying to change the big centralized institutions is a losing battle. They're already captured. Instead, we have to look to the fringes. The modern prophetic voice isn't a booming sermon from the mountaintop. It's found in what's local, in what's overlooked by the mainstream, and in new, innovative spaces. You know, the perfect modern parable for this is Moneyball. The Oakland A's baseball team couldn't beat the big market teams by playing their game, so their manager, Billy Beane, he changed the game. He looked for value where no one else was looking, in overlooked stats, and he found a hidden treasure of undervalued talent. And this isn't some new idea. This ancient parable describes the exact same strategy. It's about having the vision to see immense value where others just see a dirt field. The man in the story, he doesn't argue with anyone. He quietly recognizes the treasure, sells everything he has, and buys the whole field. He wins by seeing what no one else could. And that brings us right back to the beginning. In a culture that seems to be building a prison with a gate that won't open, the real prophetic voices, the real treasures, are out there in the wilderness, hidden in plain sight. So in a world that only values the obvious, the loud, and the centrally approved, the final question is, what overlooked field will you explore?
That was pretty good. Well, I could do one more. I could read the chapter on WrestleMania. It says some people are still watching. A couple people. Maybe I should just call it. I'll do it another time. Maybe I'll do it off screen. We'll see. If anything else is going on, nobody else is having a live stream. Nope, doesn't look like it. Nobody that I know or am subscribed to anyway. All right, well, I think I'm just going to call this the end of the stream. Thanks for watching, everybody.